How's this? Good? Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for making the trek to be here with the weather. I kind of miss it being 50 degrees a couple of days ago, but we'll take precipitation where we can get it, right? And so on behalf of the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs, the Department of Administration's Broadband program, and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, we're really, really happy to host this morning's workshop with the federal administration, the state, and the tribes. And so what we're really hoping to accomplish this morning is really to update tribes and stakeholders on what's happening and really have a discussion. A large part of this actually will be driven by information that you want, and we're so happy to be able to provide that. And this afternoon, for those after lunch will be provided, by the way. For those who want to stick around, our Director of Housing would like to do a presentation on the ARPA programs available through housing. And we're hoping that for those of you in Indian country, you'll take that information back, and so that, you know, the state and tribes can collaborate on certain projects when it comes to that. So with that said, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Misty Cool. I'm the Director of Indian Affairs for the Office of the Governor. And with that said, let's get going. It's going to be a great day. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I have an open door policy, and also the Governor. His door is always open as well. So thank you and good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chad Roop. I'm the state's broadband program manager. We are going to be rolling out the Connect MT program here very soon. And so one of the things that was so critical for getting everyone together is understanding what's happening out in Indian country and what's happening with the federal government with all of this influx of money that's coming in, as well as standing up a brand new state program. So getting people in the same room is very important, and we're fortunate in that we can Zoom folks as well. That's kind of a new technology we've all unfortunately had to become familiar with, but out of every curse, there's some blessings that come with it. So I think that this is a great opportunity for us to collaborate, and that's really the importance of being here in the middle of January in Great Falls, Montana, trying to figure out what's happening. It's a very difficult weather situation, so thank you for getting here. And before you take off today too, I hope you have safe travels home. So these are critical times for us to do this now and not wait, because money is going to be rolling. It already is starting to roll out of NTIA and several other programs. So having a good understanding of the landscape, if you will, of what everyone's doing is going to be critical for us to effectively deploy these funds. It's very clear intent from Congress that we not overbuild existing services. So many of the folks who live in Indian country are the most unserved and live in, quite often, frontier locations. And so we want to make sure that when we deploy our funds, we're cognizant of congressional intent, where Congress has really clearly defined certain criteria, and there's a lot of new terms that have come out here in this last federal legislative session and state legislative session. So these are things that it's good education for everyone involved. And if you're not a provider, I'm glad you're here. And if you are a provider, I hope that you pay attention to what we're saying and offer an opportunity for the folks who are the most unserved out there. I'm from Wyoming originally. I've spent 30 out of almost 50 years in Wyoming. I was the USDA representative, the official consultant for the tribes for USDA rural development in the last administration. So I've traveled the country and I've seen a lot of the most remote places and forest places in the country, including on the coast of Alaska. So I've traveled a lot, I've seen a lot, but I've got a lot to learn about Montana because I've spent a total of 4 months in Montana. And if you've seen one location, you've seen one location. So everyone is different, and I recognize that, but the point of all of this is to get you and the folks who are on the Zoom call connected. That's the bottom line. That's the reason why we're here. We want to give economic opportunity to the people who need it to be able to succeed. Being from a small town, I I understand the implications of not having economic opportunity. And I want to ensure that we can preserve our own heritages for the opportunity for our kids and our grandkids to be able to live and thrive in where we consider very sacred places. So those are things that I look forward to doing, and it gives me job satisfaction. So thank you for coming. I believe we got Adam Geisler on the line as well. He'll be doing a presentation here in a little bit. Adam, if you want to make any comments, are you unmuted?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, great. Miriam, machachik shot no Madam Geisler, nolanoy na ipayong gwitchum and Hish. Good morning to all my friends there in the great state of Montana. I just want to quickly say thank you for having both myself and Gilbert, who you'll see in the room representing NTIA today. We're really excited to have a conversation about a few different things and talk about some collaboration. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Adam Geisler, and I'm the division chief over here at NTIA for the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, which is overseeing about $3 billion at this point in investment into Indian country between the Consolidated Appropriations Act and the IIJA, the most recent infrastructure bill that has come out. I was born and raised in Montana, believe it or not. St. Vincent's Hospital is where I was born. I make it up to the great state of Montana quite a few times a year, have lots of friends and family, and have been all over the state, both visiting Indian country and also friends and family, and enjoying the big sky country. So really happy to be here. And my apologies for not being there in person. Obviously, we're working through a lot of applications currently, and just taking 3 days out wasn't on the calendar for me. So I apologize for not being able to be there in person and shaking everybody's hands. And I won't lie, I have a small love for Taco John's as well. So I would have loved to have picked up a 6-pack and a pound. So really, again, thank you for the time. And with that, Chad, I'll turn it back over to you, and looking forward to the discussion we're going to have.
Thanks, Adam. I believe, Gilbert, if you want to join us here, we'll have Gilbert go through his presentation. I know we had planned to do an opening ceremony, but I believe that unfortunately the person who was planning to do it couldn't make it. And so I know that we all appreciate our Supreme Being and what our God offers us. So with that appreciation, I think we'll go ahead and move forward, if you don't mind. So Gilbert, if you would, go ahead, sir. Sorry. He would like to. Okay, please. If you'd like to, I'd love for you to be able to be, if you're willing to, if you'd want to, we're more than happy to have you do so, sir. Thank you. If you don't mind, if you could come up to the mic, because we've got folks on Zoom, so that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lockley. You could stay seated too, some of you guys, if you want. It's Blackfoot Way. I'll just well as you could also stay seated, but it's up to you guys. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Lauren Monroe Jr. I'm Secretary of the Blackfeet Tribe. It's good to be here for this important discussion. So with that, I'll open this off with a good prayer this morning. I am not going to say that's deal. Smokit, Panok Sixiko, Stumos Sixika Xtipi, Amskapi Pigani, Apos Pigani. Creator, we come before you today humbly that we go ahead and through this day, we learn that all the things we need to do, that you watch over our families, you protect our loved ones, you protect us from danger, that you always encourage us to do the best we can for our people. That we've discussed today's meetings, that we always can take this information and apply it to the ones that we love the most, our families, our communities, and our tribes. Also say a special prayer for all the ones that have driven here today, that they make it home to their loved ones, that you always protect us from danger and you give us success in this life as you've given us to our ancestors all the years ago, that you continue to water us and you help us grow, and we always learn on each other. We always have more to learn from each other than our differences. And with that, thank you for giving us life and for this day. Amen.
Thank you everyone for having me. I am the first of two NTIA presentations, and then we'll pass it off to my colleague Chad Roop for some presentations and updates from the state of Montana. With that, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Gilbert Resendez. I'm a broadband program specialist with NTIA. I realized after putting my presentation together, I didn't really give a level setter to NTIA, and I should have. So I'll just kind of talk through who we are as an agency and why we're here. As an agency, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration sits within the U.S. Department of Commerce. And by statute, we are the Telecommunications and Information Policy Advisor to the White House. And with that mission, part of it, what we work towards is universal connectivity of American citizens to broadband. And that is a big, high priority of this administration. So with that, I will go through and talk about some of our new programs that we were given under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I primarily work with our state stakeholders, so I'm also happy to provide any sort of facilitate any introductions to your state people, although we do have Chad Roop, who is our state person here, but I'm always happy to help and be involved in any conversation. So just sort of an overview, a high-level overview. We were given 4 programs under this legislation, or 6, depending on how you break up the Digital Equity Act. That is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD program, as we call it. The Digital Equity Program, which was authorized under the Digital Equity Act, which was part of the IIJA. The Tribal Connectivity and Technical Amendments, which I'll briefly touch on here. My colleague Adam will talk a little bit more about that when he gives updates on our previous Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program and how this new program works with that program. And then our enabling middle mile broadband infrastructure program. With that, I'll go ahead and dive in. So at a high level, the Infrastructure Act provided $65 billion to broadband funding. Before I jump, about $48 billion of that goes to NTIA, and we break that down, or the legislation rather breaks that down to a little under $42.5 billion going to the BEAD program, $2.75 billion going to the Digital Equity Program, $2 billion to the Tribal Program, and $1 billion to Middle Mile. Additionally, within that, I do think it is important to point out that there were other agencies that received broadband funding. About $14 billion went to the FCC to administer what it calls the Affordable Connectivity Program, $2 billion to the USDA to administer via the Rural Utility Service, and then $600 million in private activity bonds. So that is a little bit about what this piece of legislation provides for broadband at a high level. With that, I work for NTIA, so I will go into the key programs that we received under this legislation. So the first is what we call the BEAD program. Like I said, its official name is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. This provides a $42.45 billion funding pool for broadband. It is a state and territory formula program. And the program objective is to close the availability gap, as Congress found in the legislation. The program has 3 primary priorities, which is to first address unserved locations. And that's defined as locations that do not have access to 25.3. That's 25 megabits per second in the download speed and 3 megabits per second in the upload speed. When we say 25.3, I never want to assume. And then after states and territories have addressed their unserved locations, they may use those funds to address underserved locations. So that is defined as areas that have access to that 25.3, but maybe do not have access to 120 yet. And then connecting community anchor institutions without gigabit connections. Additionally, an eligible entity must also prioritize persistent high poverty and high poverty areas, speed of proposed networks, build time, and a demonstrated record of compliance with federal labor laws. Other key requirements that this program calls out in legislation, specific network requirements are included, for example, speeds at 120. Eligible entities must ensure that they are that they or a subgrantee can provide at least a 25% match, and then low-cost programs, a low-cost plan requirement, which we are in the process of determining. The second program that I want to spend a little bit of time on is what we call the Digital Equity Programs. Like I said, this was created under the Digital Equity Act, and it provides a $2.75 billion funding pool. The purpose of this program is to promote digital equity and promote equitable access and digital inclusion so that people may participate in the digital and modern economy. Priorities of this program include veterans, individuals, or households living at or below 150% of the poverty line, aging individuals, incarcerated individuals, individuals with disabilities, individuals with language barriers, racial or ethnic minorities, and people who are part of racial ethnic minority groups, and individuals who primarily reside in rural areas. This program is broken into sort of three programs or three phases. The first is a state, too far back. The first is a state planning grant program, which the legislation allocates $60 million to. The next is a state capacity grant program, which the legislation allocates $2.44 billion to, and then the competitive grant program. So states first receive funding to receive planning. Following that planning process, states can apply for funds for capacity building. And that is a formula grant for states and territories. The objectives of that program is to support the digital equity plan activities and inclusion activities that they defined in their state plans. Eligibility and administering entity options are consistent with the planning, so they can define that. Eligible costs and activities include updating or maintaining a state digital equity plan. There's a caveat to how much can be used for that. Implementing the state digital equity plan, awarding sub-grants to entities, as well as a number of others. And then once that phase has happened, NTIA will begin awarding state capacity grants, and the competitive program will be launched. This is a $1.25 billion funding pool. It's a competitive grant program, and it's to support efforts to promote digital equity and inclusion, to achieve digital equity and promote the adoption of broadband. Any of the following areas on this screen can be used. Any of the following, if they are not serving or have not served, can serve as an administrative entity of this program, which includes political subdivision, agencies, or instrumentalities of the state, Indian tribes or Alaska Native entities or Native Hawaiian organizations. And this is where I would encourage people in this room to work with their states, community anchor institutions, or local educational agencies, to name a few. Eligible activities are also defined on this slide, which include developing and implementing this program, implementing training or other workforce development programs, and to construct, upgrade, or expand, operate new or existing public access to computing centers, to name a few. The tribal grant program is the third program that we were authorized under this legislation. It is a $2 billion funding pool. Grants to eligible entities with approved applications are the type of program that this funds. My colleague Adam will dive a little bit more into this. This program provided some technical and timeline commitment amendments to the current tribal broadband program, as well as allocating $2 billion to NTIA for tribal connectivity. And he will provide a little bit more of a deep dive into that. And then the last program that we have under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is $1 billion allocated, to our middle mile grant program to exploit the expansion of networks. This, like I said, is $1 billion funding pool. It is a direct competitive grant on a technologically neutral basis to encourage the expansion of middle mile in the U.S. Eligible entities must meet at least 2 of the 5 conditions on this slide, which include adopting fiscally sustainable middle mile strategies, demonstrating benefits to national security, identifying resources to speed up projects, they've identified specific documented and sustainable demand for middle mile for interconnection or a commitment to offering non-discriminatory interconnection. Additionally, eligible entities must also agree to prioritize connecting to unserved areas, connecting to non-contiguous trust lands, or offering wholesale carrier-neutral service at a reasonable rate, in addition to offering interconnection in perpetuity on a reasonable rate of return. So that's a high-level overview of the programs that we have. NTIA recently issued its request for comment on these programs that we were authorized under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You can find that in the Federal Register. We also have links directly on the NTIA website or our Broadband USA program website. Comments for this program are due back to NTIA on February 4th by 5 p.m. Eastern. You can submit comments via regulations.gov by searching the docket number that we have on our website. It is important, and we are committed to hearing a diverse set of comments and from a diverse set of communities and stakeholders on how NTIA should be thinking about these programs and how we should be designing what things we should be looking at. So I would strongly encourage folks to send any comments that they have to us so we can be sure to take that into consideration and make your voice heard. The last thing that I want to close out with is we are in the process of doing a number of virtual public listening sessions for our programs. The next 3 are on the slide. They are January 26th, February 9th, and February 23rd, and they are all from 2:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern, and registration information is available on our Broadband USA program website. So folks can sign up and make sure that they get the virtual meeting links for those. And with that, that is everything I have. I have some time for a couple questions. If anyone has anything, not, I will, yes.
For the 25.3, does that include satellite or high latency or limited bandwidth as well, or is it just for the FCC when you say it has to be unlimited bandwidth or certain latency?
Yeah, I am
Hey, Gilbert?
not, yes, Adam.
Do you mind, just for the folks online, repeating the question? We just can't hear the audio.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, no problem. So the question was, if for the 25.3 standard, does that include things like satellite or low latency technology or high latency requirements? Excuse me, high latency requirements technologies. I have not read the BEAD Act. I will be very honest in a short amount of time. So I hesitate to give a firm answer, but I do know that is a speed requirement. I know this we will take into consideration a number of things. If you have comments on that, I would encourage you to submit that to the public comment request. Because I know that some communities that is what is feasible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the language that's pulling from the statute. So if you have thoughts on that. Oh, yes, sorry. So the question was, how would an applicant demonstrate national security under the middle mile program that their program or application demonstrates a benefit to national security? That's the language that's given to us in the statute. If there is a program that you can point to or that's analogous, that we should be taking a look at, I would encourage you to submit that through public comment, but I hesitate to give strong and firm technical assistance on that or interpretation.
Hey, Gilbert.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I think that one point that Gilbert's making, and I'm not sure who's asking on the national security, is it a tribal question?
No.
Okay. I know that there's a few tribes that are on the border, including Blackfeet. So I think what's important in this process that Gilbert's highlighting is that, and let me come on camera, is, if there is a specific example of how to demonstrate that, this is the time for you to tell us what examples we should be considering as we develop the NOFO around these programs. So, right. So if it seems like Gilbert is saying, I don't know, it's because right now we're asking everybody else to give us your perspective on how we should be evaluating that, right? The statute kind of sets the guideposts, but there's a level of discretion that the department has as we develop the NOFOs, right? Not everything is extremely clear and concise. And so we have some latitude. So this is an opportunity for you to share with us what you think some of these standards or considerations should be. And as you hear Gilbert say, you know, if you have feedback, send it to us. Please send it over to us. We'll take a hard look at that and evaluate that as we develop the program. Thanks, Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for that clarification. Any other questions? Yep. Okay.
So would we submit recommendations for releasing the guidelines to that regulation website or?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question was if people have any input on, how to interpret a specific piece, but be it technology or maybe defining national security, how would you submit that? So I would submit that to, you can always send feedback to broadbandforall@ntia.gov, which is the email that we have on our website or on the slide right now. But our official process for receiving comments and feedback on any of these programs is that regulations.gov.
Gilbert, this is Deanna McKay. I'm a former commissioner on the National Indian Gaming Commission. Apologies for just being online, but what the individual may be referring to is cybersecurity issues that have hit tribal casinos over the past few years, including a number of ransomware issues. So that may be something you all take into consideration. As you know, casinos have been a big source of income for tribes over the years, and they just, particularly after COVID, can't afford to be hit by cybersecurity issues and ransomware. So thanks for taking that into consideration.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
The last one that I want to ask right now is, in regards to NTIA, how are they working with states on with the funds that are going to go to the states to ensure, again, I'm not trying to be rude out the state, right, but to make sure that the state issue the funds appropriately, accordingly, they're going to get any kind of oversight, things like that. Because one of the things that working with tribes we have is, we've seen certain activities in the past where certain companies will get funding that they think is going to go to the tribe, and then they never make this way down to the actual tribe. They think it's way around the reservation, but not actually on the reservation itself. So is there a way that NTIA plans to observe, assist, and kind of oversight?
Provide oversight. Yeah, so the question was for those on the Zoom is, what are NTIA's plans for providing oversight specifically to the BEAT program, it sounds like, where it's money that goes to the state to be dispersed across the state? Thank you for the question. We do work very regularly with states. My primary role at NTIA is working with state governments and staffing what we call our State Broadband Leaders Network program. So we do have a lot of that relationship with states and work very closely with them. If there are, and I know I sound like a broken record, but if there are specific examples or things that you would want to see written in program rules, I would again encourage you to send that into to that regulations.gov. Those are things that aren't specifically defined in the legislative statute, but we do want to hear that feedback from you on how we should be thinking about that, since that's not always something that we have an insight to, but you all in this room have insights to through your lived experiences. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That one of the efforts is to create a tribal leaders broadband network, to have that. Because I was kind of curious to how the NTIA doesn't haven't recognized that there's a gap here.
Mm-hmm.
That information went to state broadband network. There should be another entity that works directly with tribes and has that same formal kind of community.
Right. I'm not sure if that's something that my colleague Adam can speak to. Adam is our division chief for tribal. I know you have a very long title, Adam. I believe it's Tribal Outreach and Nation-to-Nation Dialogue. But I believe the question was, what is NTIA doing to reach out to tribes and close the gap between states? Am I hearing your question correctly?
That's the situation, but there's actually a state broadband leadership.
Correct.
And the federal government, NTIA, meets with them. Over time, they have to do this specific, for 2 years probably. And I would just ask for that kind of organization.
Okay.
Effort to be created as a private broadband leadership.
Gotcha. So the feedback or comment is that we should be looking at creating a tribal leaders network, tribal broadband leaders network, excuse me. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions?
Gilbert, can you do me a favor? Who made the, if there's any more questions, if we can just know who's making the comment or providing the feedback?
Yes.
Madonna, Milwaukee.
What organization or tribal organization are you with, Madonna?
I actually am with the company.
Okay. Turtle Island Communications?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good to hear your voice, Madonna.
Well,
Yes. Yeah, so your name was Pat O'Brien with Turtle Island. I'm sorry, what was it? AMR, excuse me. And your question was, have we documented what the competitive grant process will look like what the formula will look like? And you're speaking to the middle mile program or any of the competitive programs that. Yes, I know there are some of the statutes lay out things that we should be considering or need to consider, but some of that is left up to us and how we will consider it. And that's what we're in the process of right now, is taking feedback from the public. So if there are things that we should be considering, I would encourage you to submit that through the public comment process. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record. Yeah, I mean, the basic structure that we can look at too is the legislation at this time. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I will pass it over to my colleague, Adam Geisler. Yes, and I'll pull up his slides here. Go ahead. Adam. Adam, we have your slides.
Can everybody online see that as well? Adam, can you see your slides?
I cannot, not at the moment, no. I still see the last slide deck.
Now can you see your slides?
I can. And Gilbert, don't go too far because I can't hear what folks are saying in the room. So you may have to be a little bit of a moderator here for the moment.
That is okay.
Right on. And thanks for driving the slides. So again, you know, I failed to thank Ms. Roop and Ms. Cool for collaborating with us on this particular engagement and being a host for the conversation. And you know, as many of you know, there's broadband is front and center for the conversations that are being held across the country. And this is an exciting time because broadband is also being held as a high priority topic of conversation for tribes. I'm a former tribal leader myself, spent about a decade on my tribe's council, and it's been interesting to see where the priorities are and how they've evolved in terms of investment when we start talking about broadband access and investment in broadband infrastructure. As we've all seen the impacts that the lack of access has brought to our communities, including my own. I live and work from, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Montana. My mother went to school there in Billings. My dad, while he grew up in Billings, went to college in Missoula, and they met at a Halloween party in Helena, right? A true Montana love story. The reality is that whether you are in Montana or in any community that is rural across the country, these broadband issues are real. The access issues for our kids are real. The telehealth issues are real. And as the commissioner mentioned, the former commissioner from NIGC, and I apologize, I didn't catch your name, there's implications on the business side, obviously, you know, from the gaming and security aspects, but even more broadly, just being able to conduct telework. And so I'm really excited to be a part of the team at NTIA. I just took on this new role here in the last 2 weeks, or 4 weeks now, as the division chief leading the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. And I do want to just spend some time here today. We'll go to the next slide, providing an update. And then I have some questions for you. This is not a tribal consultation, but I am going to ask you some questions to get some opinions of especially the tribal leaders. Thank you, tribal leaders, for being with us today, whether virtually or in person. And I do have some questions for those tribes that are on the line or in the meeting. So we'll talk a little bit about where we are with the first set of applications that we've received, what we call round one. You're going to hear me beg and plead for a moment to apply for all the other funding that is out there. We'll talk about the amendments in a little bit more detail within the new infrastructure bill, the IIJA, the administration, you might also hear it called the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill. And then lastly, we'll jump into the discussion a little bit about some questions that we have for you, and then more broadly about some collaboration considerations with the state. So next slide, please. One more time. Thanks. And one more time. There we go. You gotta love it here at the federal government. We like our PowerPoints. I've been here 6 years and I can't believe I've lasted, and the slide decks just keep coming. So real quick overview of the Tribal Broadband Connectivity program and where we are. I know there's a lot of you that have been waiting to hear from us in terms of where your application is at. And I know a lot of you, a lot of the tribes in the state have applied and put a lot of thought into your applications. And I first just want to say thank you for applying. And in that same breath, I'm going to say thank you for your patience. We have received over 301 applications, totaling over 424 proposed projects. So remember, our Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program application had 2 legs to it: infrastructure and use and adoption. And so many of you applied for both legs of the application. And so as you can see, that's a lot of applications to review. In fact, we are 6 times oversubscribed, which I'll cover in a second. I think another interesting thing about the pool of applications that we received is that we received applications representing over 452 tribal governments, which, as you know, is well over 75% of the tribes within the lower 48. And that also includes Alaska and Hawaii. Actually had a set aside in our statute, and they've applied as well. The total amount of funding that we received from all the applications that came in, whether it was use and adoption and planning or infrastructure, was $5.88 billion. So we are 6 times oversubscribed. Congress gave us $1 billion, and really after the administrative portion comes off, it's about $980 million. So we are well oversubscribed. We do not have enough money in the original appropriation. And as you can see, $6 billion in ask. Congress added another $2 billion in the IIJA. We're still short. So, and that's going to get me to my next point in a moment. But the point being, 6 times the amount of application also means 6 times the amount of anticipated work to review these applications. And so again, on the patience, I appreciate everybody's patience. We are moving as quick as we can. We have streamlined, believe it or not, a lot of internal processes, and you are still experiencing the streamlined version. So I am going to, again, just thank you for your patience. Also, each application and project requires extensive review and curing as applicable, especially to be considered for funding. And So a lot of you are also wondering, Adam, what is taking, sure, it's a lot of applications, and yes, you've asked us to be patient, but like, what's going on? I've fielded a lot of phone calls from folks within Montana and actually across the country asking these questions. And I'm just going to remind everybody that we are experiencing curing at different phases as we review the applications, right? We had an initial review, we had a merit review, and then we had a programmatic review. When we just received the applications, the initial review basically was to try to get all the pieces together so we could move it into the scoring criteria and consideration, which is our merit review process. The initial review actually had a 77% cure rate. So again, as you guys are asking, Adam, what's taken so long, right? Each step in the process has required extensive coordination and communication with the tribes or the applicants as the application moves its way through the process, which is very different than other competitive grant programs where, if you forgot to sign a form or you didn't attach a budget, you'd just be removed for consideration. Our program didn't do that. We reached back out to you and said, hey, we need you to sign this form or we're missing a document. So it could be scored. So, right, each portion of this process has taken time. The other thing I just wanted to highlight as well is in the NOFO, the application also, in order to get past the merit review process, had to score 70 points or greater. And we do have some applications that did not pass the 70-point threshold that will not be considered for funding. It does not bring me any joy to share that with folks. And we are working on getting notification out to those tribes or those applicants that did not pass merit and will not be considered for funding, for further funding. And we're hoping to have that out the door here at the latest by the end of February, but it should be coming it should be coming sooner than that. I'll just share with you, I have a memo moving its way through clearance as we speak. And again, process. So again, thank you for your patience. I know a lot of you want to know where you are at in this review process. The other thing I'm going to say is while we are going to be sending notification out for those that failed or did not pass the merit review and will not be considered, we are also starting to send out a lot of curing communications with applicants that have moved into further consideration in the programmatic review in consideration for funding. And so those communications are also rolling as we speak. Again, the team is working through a systematic process, going through every single one of these applications. And so do not be surprised if a member of my team reaches out to you, if you are an applicant, here in the next 4 to 6 weeks, asking for a whole lot more detail around your application. And if that happens, no guarantee for funding, but what I will say is that is a very positive thing and a good step in the next direction for consideration for funding. And that means you're probably getting close. Again, no guarantees, but I just wanted to highlight that a lot of communication is going to be coming from my team to folks that either, again, did not pass and are no longer being considered, or we're going to start digging in and asking for a lot of details because your application is being considered for further for funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you notice, this is its own slide for an important reason. We are encouraging everybody to continue to apply for the other funding opportunities that are out there. There is the USDA Reconnect program. There is EDA, where there is specific tribal set-asides. You have the capital project fund for Treasury, $167,000 for a tribe under the Treasury pot of money. So those dollars are there as well. I'm also going to encourage you to think creatively about your transportation dollars, your housing dollars, because there are some flexibilities to look at when you're looking at those pots of funds. I ran roads for my own tribe for a long time, and there's a lot of flexibility, especially when we're talking about digging up a road and replacing utilities or upgrading utilities. So I'm going to encourage you to be creative and, again, continue to apply for everything that's out there. And why? Because we are going to continue to be making awards at NTIA on a rolling basis through the spring of 2022. And I know a lot of you are saying spring of 2022, Adam, could be, the beginning of spring or the end of spring. And there's a reason why that's in there, and we'll cover that here in a moment. And it has to do with what we do with the additional money from the IIJA. But while we are going to continue to make awards in a rolling fashion, please don't stop applying for the other funds that are out there. Let us sort out any potential duplication on the back end. If you get awarded for multiple programs, it's a good problem to have. So again, please continue to apply while you are waiting for us. Don't let us hold you back. Keep moving through your processes and implementing your plans. Next slide, please, Gilbert. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the amendments from the IIJA. Next slide. I know Gilbert at a high level covered this, but I'm just going to recap it one more time. There are some big changes that I think were important in the IIJA that are a result of both what you provided in our original consultation and as a result of your advocacy on the Hill. So the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Technical Amendment is the official name of the technical amendment, and that's what it is. It's an amendment to the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. And it added $2 billion additional dollars. And again, it's the same type of program. It's a grant program. And the program objectives are providing new funds and extending expenditure deadlines to the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program that was originally established in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. So some key amendments. As you've heard me say, there's an additional $2 billion. Another big win, I think, out of the updated or the amended legislation is, as many of you remember, the initial NOFO gave a 3-month turnaround timeline, which was tough for everybody. The new timeline, if we are to launch a second NOFO, is now 6 months. So there's a little bit more breathing room on another application window if we are to move forward in doing another application window. In addition to that, there was a 12-month window to commit funds. We now have 18 months. And as many of you recall, there was a 1-year timeline on implementation, especially on the infrastructure side, that many of you provided feedback. Adam, how do you build a broadband network in 1 year? These are multi-year projects. Guess what? We have an amendment now that we could actually extend projects and looking at a 4-year horizon into the future as well. So that's another exciting win. The third is allowing infrastructure grantees to expend up to 2.5% total project costs for related planning, feasibility, and sustainability studies. It was a little bit less in our initial enabling legislation. And then the fourth is preserving unused allocated funds for other tribal broadband projects instead of reverting back to the Treasury, because again, there was some language that we were running the risk of if unallocated, we couldn't put it back in and issue another NOFO or another NOFO. We actually had to hand those funds back to Treasury. So that problem has been solved. So now let's talk a little bit about the things that are still the same. We'll go to the next slide, please, Gilbert. So the things that are still the same, everybody that's eligible to apply, who's an eligible entity for the program has not changed. Tribal governments, tribal colleges and universities, which I know there are some TCUs in the great state of Montana. You have the Department of Hawaiian Homelands on behalf of the Native Hawaiian community. Again, there was a set aside there for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, tribal organizations, and Native corporations. And then, as outlined in prior legislation, again, the eligible uses are broadband infrastructure deployment, including sea cable landing stations, which that would be an interesting one to see an application out of Montana for sea cable landing stations, but hey, you never know. Also, affordable broadband programs, including providing free or reduced cost broadband services, as well as prevention of disconnection of existing services. Still a focus on distance learning, telehealth, digital inclusion efforts, and obviously broadband adoption activities. And here's one thing that is I'm sure still a point of frustration, which is eligible entities can use no more than 2% of funds for administrative purposes, which administrative or indirect. And I know that a lot of the tribes probably in the room have an indirect cost rate far higher than 2%. And I guess the point here is that whether it's 22% or 50% for our program, you are capped at 2% for administrative fees or indirect costs. And that is, I'll just say that, from my lens and from hearing from many of you, I know that is probably an area of disappointment. But again, that's in statute. The priority for the program has also not changed. Our #1 goal and objective is to deploy infrastructure to unserved households. right? So we are prioritizing projects that deploy broadband infrastructure to unserved households as a key priority of the program. Next slide, please, Gilbert. All right, so I wanted to start a conversation off with folks a little bit about what we do with the $2 billion. We'll go to the next slide. For those of you that attended the tribal consultation on the 14th, these questions will look familiar. For those of you that did not, while this is not a consultation, and I apologize for the language on the top, we missed that. It should have just stuck to tribal leader discussion. I want to highlight that for my tribal leaders. This is not a tribal consultation, and I recognize that. My apologies for the mistake on the slide. I do want to ask your thoughts. We have an additional $2 billion, and I would like to just get the perspective of folks in the room on what we do with it. A number of you have applied. Obviously, it's a chicken or the egg type of a question, because a number of you are going to say, Adam, we don't know where we're at, so how can I provide feedback on this? I'm still going to ask you the questions, which is, should we add additional money to the applications that we're looking at currently? And if we should, how much money of that $2 billion should we add to the applications that we're considering? And then if we were to look at a second NOFO, when should we look at launching a second NOFO? Right, again, there's a 6-month application period. We would not be making awards on a rolling basis, or wouldn't anticipate doing that, right? So we would wait for all the applications to come in and then start making our awards as we are doing now. So that's the second question for folks that I'm hoping we could get some feedback on. And again, if you aren't prepared to answer these questions, or you want to give it some more thought, as Gilbert has said, you know, we're happy to get your feedback in writing. The feedback window on these questions is still open until the end of the month, if you want to provide formal feedback in writing. So once we conclude this conversation, I also think it's important that we spend a moment in talking about the broader conversation of the plans and goals of the tribes and the role of the state in coordinating a state plan under the $42 billion that Gilbert had covered under the BEAD program, and starting a dialogue there as well. So with that, I'll pause. Gilbert, I'm not sure, maybe we could do hands up if folks are willing to provide some comments on this. And again, this cake isn't baked. I really am asking because I really want to get the feedback. So really appreciate anything you guys are willing to share. So with that, Gilbert, I'll go ahead and let you moderate the questions.
Yeah, if folks want to raise their hands, Chad is going to walk around with the microphone so folks can provide any feedback or comment to Adam.
Thank you.
We'll take online comments as well.
Yes.
So if someone wants to unmute themselves and speak up, anyone welcome to.
And Gilbert, I also know we have some folks on the, obviously on the Zoom, and I believe, let's see if I have a button that says reactions, and I think there's a way to also raise your hand if there's folks that are on the line, tribal leaders or you know, folks that are representing their tribes that have some feedback here. Love to hear it.
This is Pat O'Brien in for name one. If I could get some clarification on one of the previous slides where you're talking about administrative costs. I'm assuming that this funding comes with the CFDA waiver. It's my understanding that it's $11.29 to the Department of Commerce. If it's coming with the CFDA number, is it going to be subject to uniform guidance? And if so, what sections of uniform guidance? If it is subject to uniform guidance, wouldn't that require that it follow the requirements for administrative cost calculations? Because that's part of uniform guidance, which is the law. There are exceptions for changing the rates and methodologies, but it has to be approved in the rates, or you have to receive special permission from OMB to use a rate different than what's negotiated. It's in the uniform guidance. are the CFRs. So there's a lot of confusion as to how it's going to work.
Did you guys want to respond to? Adam?
Gilbert?
I don't know if Adam can hear. Okay, so I have to ask Adam.
The mic, I really couldn't hear with the mic. I thought I heard uniform guidance and it sounded like something related to the 2%, but would you just mind recapping either the comment or the question? Because I think I could kind of hear it, but I just want to make sure I heard it clearly.
Yeah, so the comment came from Pat O'Brien, and it was seeking clarification on the administrative costs and how that reconciles with the administrative uniform guidance in GCFR.
Sure. So hear you loud and clear, Mr. O'Brien, and I, you know, again, this is a pain point I know for many tribes that have a negotiated indirect cost rate. However, the nuance with 2 CFR 200 and the uniform guidance is that when it's superseded by statute. So when you have administrative caps, for example, in this particular piece of legislation where there is a cap at 2%, then the negotiated indirect cost rate, while you can submit that, we are capped at 2% for your IDC or for admin. And so we've batted this around through legal. Believe me, I've tried to find a way, and they're just I have had the uniform guidance pointed out to me that you are correct, Adam. They can use it. However, the statute puts a cap at 2%, and so the statute is the overarching guide when there is direct direction from Congress in the appropriation or that particular law. Not probably what I think any of us wanted to hear, to be candid with you, but that is the justification there.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
James Custom from Fighting Media. One of the questions I did have was in regards to underserved areas. Where's the NTIA pulling that type of data of like speed, availability, and that kind of information from?
Yeah, thank you. So the question was from James Gussman, Adam, and asking when NTIA addresses, thank you, when NTIA speaks to unserved and underserved communities, where do we pull that data?
Depends on the program. In terms of the definition of unserved, right? So for the tribal broadband program, which is the program I oversee, unserved, we don't have a definition for underserved. So I just want to highlight that. We only have a definition for unserved. And unserved for the tribal broadband program is defined at having access, if you do not have access greater than 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, 25.3. And again, underserved, we don't have that. So you either have 25.3 or you do not have 25.3. And if you do not have 25.3, then we consider you unserved. In terms of the data and justification for that, many of you will recall that participated in our tribal consultation sessions for when we built the first rule for the tribal broadband program, that we heard from tribes loud and clear about the concerns of data collection and accuracy of different data sets, including the 477 data over at the FCC. And so one of the things that we took a very hard look at when we wrote the first NOFA was a consideration for tribes to self-certify. And so, and what we mean by that is if a tribe self-certifies that they are unserved, that we are going to trust but verify. And obviously we go back and we do have an MOU with the FCC and the USDA where we do look for potential for duplication. However, and I do want to just underscore this because it's an important nuance of the tribal program, that in order for, if a tribe at the end of the day, which is a government, says a sovereign government, which we respect, comes to us and says we are unserved, and they describe their process for how they demonstrated or evaluated that they are unserved, and they put that process forward in their application, we're going to respect what that process was. Again, recognizing there's a caveat to this, that if the tribe does not have an enforceable build-out commitment, and that's a definition in our NOFO, and they state that they are unserved, we are going to trust what the tribe is submitting to us, again, as a government. And the idea here is, and we all understand and recognize that there are nuances in data sets, but the bottom line is our focus is getting access to tribes that do not have that access, right? For all the reasons that we talked about in the beginning. And so at the end of the day, if a tribe knows that a region or section of their community is unserved, and they describe how they demonstrated that that is unserved, whatever their processes may be. Again, each sovereign government, we're going to respect their processes. And there is no enforceable build out commitment in that area that has been demonstrated, then we're going to trust that. Again, we'll look at the maps, but if that doesn't, all maps aren't always accurate, and all data sets are not always accurate. And we heard that again loud and clear from the consultation process. And that language will likely continue on as a foundation into any future NOFOs that we were to issue. So long answer to your question, but hopefully I answered both aspects of those. And James, I'm not sure if you have any feedback on the questions that we have up above, but should we add more money into the applications we're looking at? And if so, how much? And if we were to do a second NOFO, when should we launch a second NOFO?
First off, thank you for the response to my first question, because we work with two tribes, and I can tell you specifically that both of these tribes are in a situation where on an FCC map and according to the carrier, the tribe has connectivity. But what we specifically know is that the carrier used the reservation as a piggyback, and now is claiming that they offer services there, even though those services were never split off or branched off for the tribe to actually utilize, especially a lot of the housing communities. So it's a major concern for them that on an official government map, it's saying, oh yeah, this tribe is served, it's covered, it has connectivity, everybody's happy, birds are chirping. But in real life, we know that during COVID, kids were not able to attend school. They have no capability to do telehealth and telemedicine, and people are not being involved. And it's a really horrible situation, and we just hope that, the NTIA and especially like FCC and other agencies acknowledge and understand what the truth of that is, and not just what digital method kind of advertising out there. In regards to your second question, so absolutely. So I was attending one NTIA call, and one of the things I thought was very interesting was they did a study, I want to say it was in the early 2000s or late 90s, and they basically came back and said, based on this study, we find that we need around $10 billion to bring digital access to these tribes. And this is early on, so I can only imagine how much this need has grown with population growth, with now extensive broadband requirements and things like that. So to answer your question, should NTIA make available any additional funding? Yes, I think we need to see not $1 billion, but if we were to calculate it out, I think let's look for $20 billion, $30 billion. Let's get these tribes what they need. We see in large metropolitan and developed areas, these large companies are willing to dump hundreds of billions of dollars into these communities. The government charges enough tax and they have enough funding, in my opinion, especially if a lot of these are passing. They should be looking at these rural and unconnected, underserved, unserved tribal areas, definitely. And in regards to a second NOFO, I think that the process is very time consuming, it's very hard, and it takes a lot of resources, not only for the tribe, but for the companies assisting them. And with that being said, especially with COVID, like Northern Tribe right now is going through another COVID outbreak. So a lot of people right now are not actually at the tribe working. If we even start pulling the documents for NOFO, it becomes very, very difficult. So in my opinion, I think we need to, I don't want to say stop looking at NOFOs, but find a way that we can streamline this and add them to applications and processes that are already on the table, and not create new applications or new processes that we have to keep going back and trying to reinvent the wheel over and over again.
Thank you. So that's NTA should make more money available, and we should look at processes to be streamlined, not necessarily go to another NOFO. Okay,
Gilbert, I
Yeah.
think just one piece, and it was James, and I think it was Gustafson or Gussman.
Oh, yes, assessment, GUS,
Gussman, GUSM.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Gussman, I appreciate the feedback, and I do want to just point something out, and it's important, and I think that's what Mr. Roop and what Ms. Cool are working on here today is to start the dialogue that's needed. Right. To your point, there are data concerns. There are ways in which industry has raised concerns for you or who you represent, and vice versa. Right. I think that industry also has some concerns on how everybody can work together, and I think that's really what Chad and Misty are trying to accomplish today, is to begin that dialogue. We're here to obviously help facilitate with some of that. But I also want to be just a straight shooter and a straight broker here. The tribal broadband program has the flexibility for self-certification for tribes. However, there are considerations for the FCC data mapping sets and the census block issues that you raised. That is the type of data that will be potentially used for the BEAD program, right? So I don't mean to open up a can of worms, and I feel bad because I'm putting Gilbert in the hot seat. So if you start sweating, you guys got to give him a hard time. But the reality here is I don't want to pull any punches with folks because the bottom line here is the time to work out these issues is now, and to start having these conversations. At the end of the day, there is a role for obviously tribal government, state government, and industry in solving these issues. There's nobody that can really do this alone. You need the land use authorities and you need the providers. Everybody has to get access from somewhere, whether it's right-of-way access or backhaul access. And now is the time to really look at how you can jointly plan, and develop those relationships to accomplish those things. And again, born and raised in Montana, I realize what I'm saying. There's a lot of history amongst everybody in the state, but I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say now is the time to see how everybody can work through these issues, because we will likely never see another $42 billion or $48 billion towards broadband as a whole. And when you look at the criteria for where dollars are supposed to go and who they're supposed to serve, there's a lot of rural, underserved and unserved aspects of the state of Montana that, again, now's the time and now the dollars are starting to come. So there's my soapbox. And I'm not sure if there's hands raised on the Zoom, Gilbert, or if there's any other feedback for the questions we have or any other. I mean, this is a good time to have the general conversation as well. Chad, I can't see you, but I think this is kind of the direction we were hoping to get towards anyways.
Yes, I think there are at least two more folks in the room, Adam, since you can't see folks. And I have not seen any hands raised yet. I'll do a quick check, but we'll go to the two people here.
Okay, great.
My name is Jay Preston. I'm from the Flathead Reservation. I'm the principal of Access Montana, we're one of the providers there in the Flathead, Western Montana. I understand that you define unserved as any place where 25.3 is not available. And you haven't defined underserved. But if I understand correctly, if an area can be served with 120, that would be served. So I'm assuming that underserved is the area between those two. Truth be known, it seems like most of Montana is either unserved or underserved. But it's really a checkerboard. for instance, on the Flag Reservation, we provide the Salish and Kootenai tribes with 100 megabits upgradable to a gigabit at every one of their government locations. But most of our other services do not, that are residential, don't quite meet the 25.3 threshold, except for areas where we've upgraded the fiber to the premise. So I mean, there's a long way to go to get ubiquitous 120 service practically everywhere, particularly in Montana.
Thank you. So were you seeking clarification on an underserved definition for us? Were you seeking clarification on an underserved definition or?
Well, he said it wasn't defined, but he's talking for action, but
Okay.
maybe it's not defined, but it seems like it's parents. That's what underserved means.
Okay. I don't know if you have comments to that.
I didn't hear the tail end there.
Okay. What's that, Adam?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the tail end. It sounded like concerns of 100 or the unserved definition versus underserved.
Yes. Concerns of the unserved definition versus underserved, and that it sounds like a large portion of the state of Montana would fit one or the other.
I'd say, except in areas where you have charter providing services in, in developed town sites and cities like Great Falls and Missoula and
Sure.
Polson, et cetera. But even there, their general services, they claim to provide more than that, but I'm not sure they always deliver that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of room for improvement, and trust but verify, right? Validating, and again, I think that's to the broader need of collective planning. I think these are the types of things that NTIA is hoping that wherever the pain points are that you're identifying in coordination with Chad and his team at the state for the state plan, that these are the types of things that you're highlighting. And again, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there are data accuracy concerns, whether it's tribal or non-tribal, across the state, and how you want to share those things in your both assessment and your plan to address those issues is something that we really would like to see in those state plans. And I'm just going to say it, every state is going to be responsible in the next, what's the time frame, Gilbert? In the next 9 months or so, to put together a full-blown plan on how they are going to address the unserved portions of and underserved portions of their states, and that includes Indian country, that includes also rural areas as well, and that's really the efforts that are needed. And again, the state is going to be the point on how this is happening. And once those plans are in place, then we start talking about accessing the big money to solve and implement those plans. The goal of the administration, sure, Gilbert and I aren't politicals, we're career guys. The goal of NTIA is to get as many folks connected as we can, and the goal of the legislation is to get the unserved and underserved areas of the country connected. That is the priority of the 42 billion. That is the priority that we have at the tribal program, and that is a priority of NTIA. So that type of feedback, however you can incorporate that into your planning activities at the state level and in coordination, I think are great things to identify. Too many words, guys. I'm sorry.
Morning. My name is George Heavyrunner. I serve on the board for the Side Corporation for the Blackfeet Tribe. And I guess this opinion for your first question, I'd really quick responses to that. It's kind of asking about the glasses, whether it's half full or empty, first you gotta put the water in and take a look. So if we would respond to additional funding, of course, but once you fund our application, then we'll know what you funded, and perhaps the second round will allow us to apply for additional funding to apply for that as well, so we can fulfill our plan, if you will, for the development and deployment of the broadband on our reservation. So that would be important to once we know where we're at, and then we can tell you what additional dollars you may need, or we may need to do that. Another comment is working with the state. Well, the Montana legislature passed a bill, Senate Bill 297, where they are going to be providing some funds, but it makes it very difficult for tribes to apply for that, because if we're receiving the federal dollars, they're not going to be eligible for the state dollars. So if there's a discussion down the road for a partnership or an opportunity to work together, we've already been shot on the outset in respect to working under their umbrella, and then additional requirements they have for a 20% match, those types of things. So at some point, we would glad to say, yes, make the funds available, but we need to know what you funded us first.
So, I guess there's two parts there, George. And thanks. I appreciate the feedback. Had an opportunity to get up to Blackfeet, and George, I think we may have met when we were up at I was wearing a different hat at the time, but for another sister bureau within Commerce, FirstNet. But I did have a chance to get out to Blackfeet, and actually had a chance to cruise around with some of the team out there, Mr. Robert DeRozier, and got to meet a lot of different folks in understanding the connectivity landscape and some of the things that you guys are looking at and pursuing. And obviously the things that you're looking at for taking hold of the business elements within the region, and that is commendable. With that being said, completely recognize that these are not easy questions to answer, because a lot of folks want to know where they stand before they say anything, right? So if you are funded, then and you're fully funded, then you'd say, open up another round. But if you're not funded, or you may have to come back, you may be hesitant and want to hold more money back for a second attempt, or if you're partially funded, right? So I can appreciate the feedback. With regards to the first two questions, on the last one there, in the event that we needed to do a second NOFO, removing the dollar amounts that were available, what would be the best time to do a second NOFO for the tribal broadband program, right? Knowing that you have the state planning going on, knowing that you have all these other windows that are open right now that you're likely applying for and waiting on. Are we talking this summer? Are we talking this fall? Or like when is a good time to open up that 6-month application window for folks that makes sense for the tribes in the state, right? And I'm obviously taking into consideration, the construction time periods, especially, in your neck of the woods, George, right? I still haven't made it all the way through the Sunrise the last couple of times I've been up there. So I realize that snow stays on the ground a little bit longer in sections of the state. So maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't, but I am going to just see if you had a little bit more feedback on a second NOFO timing.
Well, I guess I would say yesterday.
Fair enough.
This is Chad Roop with the state. I just say that we're planning on, see this in my presentation here in a little bit. There's a couple things that are important to consider. Is one, our broadband map that we're going to be publishing here in the near future. The way we designed it is specifically showing locations. It's unlike the FCC map or other maps that roll up an area and say this area is served. Because we all know that there are certain locations within an area that are well served, and right next door it's completely unserved. And so that was an important point in how our map will be different from so many other maps. And I think,
you know, it is going to be based off providers' data with volunteers, but there is ways for people to participate through speed tests online. There's ways for people to know that, and it's not a static map. It's not published once and done. It gets updated on a periodic basis, and you know, we're working through that right now. So please give us a little bit of time to develop that. But I think those are some important things that it'll be defined again by state law that we have to follow as unserved, frontier, underserved, or served, according to the state definition, which is different than FCC, different than the CIA. Those are a few things for consideration. Additionally, we're planning on having our estimated timeline, again, estimated timeline is to have the works determined by June 30th. So I know people would like to have that yesterday. I know that they would like to have it by May, but we're moving as quickly as we can, but we're also trying to be diligent in that piece of decisions and following the process that we need to from the state law. So with that, I'll turn that over to questions.
Has the state made their definition of unserved, underserved, and served?
Yes, it's defined by state statute. So SB 297 defines the state's version of unserved, underserved. And I'll cover that in my presentation here in a little bit. But yes, SB 297 is the guiding statute for that.
At both the, this is Madame Milwaukee, at the federal level and at the state level, is there a recognition that the lack of investment of this type of infrastructure on tribal land has not occurred? Like in one instance, I'm thinking the investment of a company is antiquated copper, and what the investment was made on was the equipment, electronics. And I just have I want to make sure that it doesn't require a tribe having to convince either the federal government or the state government that this may allow 25.3, the conditions of the electronics may allow 25.3, but the copper, the antiquated copper, is playing tricks on what's actually in place there and what isn't. Because yes, it can provide 25.3, it will never get beyond that, and it requires a lot of maintenance on maintaining 25.3 speed. So I wanted to make sure that that was understood, because there's a reason that tribes have unserved and underserved areas, a lack of investment, and if that hasn't been done for years, the chances of copper being in place there are pretty high. And just someone submitting a grant for a VDSL solution isn't going to make a huge difference on tribal land.
Yeah, so I think to clarify for Adam, who I don't think can hear it clearly on the laptop audio, you're saying that we, the federal government and state government, should be aware of the lack of investment in tribal communities, which have caused them to be underserved, and that a large majority of them have more copper infrastructure, which require lots of maintenance to get to 25.3 to begin with. Okay, thank you very much for the comment. Do you have anything to add, Adam?
Yeah, first off, Madonna, I think always good to hear your voice, and you know, I always appreciate seeing strong advocates like yourself well, I guess I don't see you in the room, but it's great to hear you in the room. You know, you got a lot of passion for this space and doing the right thing, and I think that, you know, I guess the only reflection I would say is at the federal level, do we see the need for investment, especially on the department side? And what I would say to that is yes. Right. Absolutely. However, I will also say we don't, and as you know, you and I have chatted in the past, right? We don't appropriate the funding mechanisms. And so we can't, Gilbert and I, if we had the ability to print the cash, believe me, we'd hit print tomorrow to solve some of the antiquated infrastructure issues that you described, right? There's also the nuance that you brought up. You know, not all 25.3 is equal. You can really start mincing words between, well, is it sustained 25.3? What happens when a household has 5 people? Does it degrade the 25.3 access? Do they all have 25.3 while somebody's doing homework, two parents are doing telework, and somebody's playing video games because they're homesick or something. So you raised some really fair points that we acknowledge. I mean, I want to make this clear, we acknowledge it, but I'll also just, and as you know, and I don't mean to sound flippant or by any means rude, but we don't appropriate the money. And so I think, again, back to the important part of, as you think about, and again, the tribes in the state and industry all got to be talking with one another to figure out how you put this plan together, which is a monumental lift in a state as big as Montana. It's a lot to consider. But I would also say that now is the time to come up with a collective strategy on what those investments look like and to put a dollar amount to those things. Right. Again, we have $48 billion between all these pots of money that we want to, that we've been tasked with putting towards solving the problem. And, the hope is that we do that. But the reality is that still may not address it. And at least you guys have identified the costs and the goals to continue any advocacy that you want to take down the legislative path as well for future consideration and appropriation. So from the federal level, we hear you. We're going to do everything we can to support those activities, but obviously we also don't appropriate the dollars, and that's going to take some more advocacy for the goals that you have collectively if there's additional investment needed on the federal side.
I'll add one point too. This is Chad with the state. One of the reasons for this meeting was that unfortunately God didn't give me the ability to be honest. So I have quite frankly a big blind spot on what's happening out there currently within the tribe who applied for NTIA funding. Understanding what different models of what funding mechanisms and definitions for unserved and speed are important for the different programs, because unfortunately not everyone aligns on what those definitions are. And so absolutely acknowledge lack of infrastructure. I was home this last weekend in a community of 5,000 people. My parents were supposed to be in 25 free or no provider. I did a speed test, 0.8 megabits per second. 0.8. That was in 25 free minutes. So I get it. And it's something that is truly irritating, but the only way you can fix it is fix it. And when you fix it, is to provide the funding and show that you don't have it. And so that's the best way to cure the illness, if you will, to really get past this issue. We are here to provide an opportunity in accordance with state statutes. There are certain parameters for that state funding that's defined by statute. And that's why it's so important for the providers to work with government entities to get to the solution. We recognize that there's a lot of poor infrastructure in Indian country, and it's important to get that infrastructure fixed. But I have no knowledge on who's applied for what and where. It's really hard for me to be able to help have that discussion point. And it's not if you've applied, it's if you've been approved. So I'm more willing to look at applications that are important for the statute and put that before the decision makers to allow to make the appropriate choices on behalf of the state. So we take that into consideration.
Good morning. My name is Donald Longnight. I'm with Fort Belknap Indian Community. And on the state statute, what I was kind of concerned about was back in, I guess you could say, the mid-2000s, we were deciding to start doing our own infrastructure on all of this. And then we applied for a couple of the grants back then. And what made me a little upset with all of that with the state was that when we put in for it, they told us they couldn't fund us only because even though in the NOFO it said any federally recognized tribe is eligible for this. But we got turned down because we had copper on our reservation at that time from a local carrier. So they said they could not fund us. And so there's a lot of reservations here in Montana that are in the same situation, except for the ones that decided to buy their own telco and have their infrastructure. And the other thing is what I'd like to say is
to add more money, I would like to see that other 200 billion put into this one that we're already put in for the infrastructure, and to see the next snowball that's coming out, maybe come out, you know, a little bit after summer, but by fall, so by the time all the money comes, we'll be able to start using it next year, right when spring comes, so we start advancing our technology.
Thank you. So to make sure Adam understands, since he's
I think I heard Mr. I heard Mr.
You did?
Longknife. I heard yes, all of it, and if there is a second NOFO, end of summer, kind of beginning of fall, again, thinking about that horizon of the application window and when they get the money to start construction on something. Yep. Thank you, by the way, for the feedback.
Is there anyone on the Zoom call? No, we've not heard from anyone. I've checked and I haven't seen any hands, but if there's anyone on Zoom, if you have any comments or questions, if you could please take yourself off mute. We would want to hear those as well. Oh.
I didn't get a comment back on my first question about with the state changing that wording so that, like I said, there's reservations that don't have an ETC or anything like that. So are we going to get turned down again because we have just copper, but another entity has it on already?
This is Jeffrey for the state. The guiding statute for us is both House Bill 632 and SB 297. And under SB 297, I'll cover this in my presentation, but the way the statute is written is that government entities are not eligible to apply for funding. To be eligible to apply for funding, if you read the statute, it'll say you need to be an entity that provides a service, have the technical, managerial, and financial capacity to deliver that service on a sustainable basis. That's the way the statute's written. So from the state's perspective, where based off current law, I would highly encourage the entity, if you're not your own broadband provider, to work with the provider so that you can get the service and have access to those funds on the in-Indian country, if that's where it is that you're seeking funding. That's why I think it's important to have providers in the room, and I'm showing no preference by saying to the providers, what I'm saying is work with a provider to try to get that funding, to make sure you have the technical, managerial, and financial capacity. That's the way the law is currently written. So I have to abide by what the state law currently says. Regardless of any emotion on it, I have to go with what the state law says.
This is a question for the NTIA. Is there a way in the future that you guys can get comments or recommendations from the tribe themselves before you go and give up the funds to states, and then you have kind of like those regulations and laws and things in place that really don't make it economical or feasible for the tribe to do it? Because I can tell you, like, for example, we can assist with it, like from one side, but that's not fair for the tribe to have to get locked down for a provider, especially one that maybe has been mistreating them for so long. Why should they have to go back to that provider because these funds are locked in these types of organizations?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, say a few comments there. There's definite discrepancy with the way the current state law is written and eligibility for the lead program. The state recognizes that. So that's noted. And believe me, I'm paying attention to what that is and talking to folks who are folks of those discrepancies to determine the next appropriate steps to allow us to be able to move forward and have eligibility for those programs. With that, I'll leave it.
Yeah. Adam, did you catch all that question fully?
I did, and if you don't mind recapping, then also just who the speaker was.
Yeah, I'll recap again. It was James, yes. I have it written down, looking back. James, again, from the top of the comment section we've been having, and the question was if there's a way that NTIA in the future can go to tribal communities first before divvying up funds that are going to go to the state, so that they can make their voices heard in that process. Am I capturing you correctly?
Right, because like we can hear with Montana, there's certain regulations and laws in place that are not beneficial to the tribes. And this money, at least some of it, right, was designed to go to bring the tribes up to a current standard. So it's not fair that they're stuck in that same loop of laws and inconsistency that's been holding them down for so long. So I think, what I would like to see, but I'm not a tribe, I just want to be clear, but what I would like to see, and I think, is that the tribes are able to see that funding because they are a sovereign nation, right? Or a federal agency who does not have the same laws and regulations in place, chief administrator.
I think I heard the issue, and so I guess it was Mr. Gussman. There we go. Sorry. I think to answer the question, the first part is we do go consult when we have the latitude ahead of time in program development. I think the challenge here is that Congress had already approved the language in statute. And so while we provide, there's plenty of times where folks from the Hill ping our office or others and say, hey, what are the issues the tribes are saying? Obviously, direct funding is always a consistent portion of feedback. And I'll just share with you, when I saw the BEAD program legislation come down, there are aspects of that where there are tribal set-asides in there, in the equity program in particular. And but again, to your point, James, that is also driven, to my understanding, through the state. And again, that's driven by statute at the federal level. And so for the ability for me to go confer, or NTIA to go confer while the sausage is being made is kind of tough, because we really don't have, it's really not our role to be providing, to be influencing the legislative process unless we're asked, which we always provide those comments. Hey, tribes want to see direct funding, and that is a concern. So I hear you loud and clear. I just think that there's a little bit of a hang up when it's already in the law. It's tough for us to go back and, as you saw, the IIJA had technical amendments to issues that were raised previously. And so I guess what I would say is, in order to address your concern, you'd probably need to go, it's not you'd probably, that definitely is something that you'd want to consider meeting with your state representatives, federal representatives, and raising as an issue of concern if that's something that you have. And I apologize for sounding like a Fed. 6 years in, and I unfortunately sound more and more like one every day. But that's just the hard fast truth in terms of the influence in the process there. So that's also back to, right, I won't lie, the infrastructure bill, as you all know, was not an easy win to get across the board for anybody, and the idea of amending it probably has its challenges, if I'm being just direct about this. And so, the alternative path is also just to consider, what can you do in working with Chad and Misty and within the state to address the equity issues that you've raised. And so, I don't want to speak for the state by any means, but I think that that's another purpose of today's conversation, is to start the dialogue around, how do you implement all of these different pots of money in a way that solves the needs as a whole of the tribes and the states collectively, in the way that Congress has crafted this legislation. So sorry, James, I don't have a better answer, but that is the answer. When I have the latitude to write the rules, we definitely consult. And when I do not have the latitude, those are going to be legislative fixes at the federal level, which we're not allowed to advocate. As Chad, being a former Fed, I think is very well aware. So I'm not sure, Chad, if you had anything else you wanted to add on this topic.
Well, I don't know, I recently served 10 years on the council. The Senate Bill 297 is a good example in the state with tribes that the consultation did not happen. We have a legislature that meets every 2 years. You can't go back to the well to get them to change that legislatively. It's won't work. And so they need us more than we need them as far as one of your charges is to facilitate interagency, state, tribal, and private sector coordination. So we're not off to a good start in facilitating this type of relationship with this state. If you have a bill that really basically closes the door on you before you can even apply. So saying that, I guess then, from my perspective, we'll probably lean more towards the federal level, if you will, for funding, consultation, and what have you, because there's other nuances that are in place with tribes and states in their relationship when it comes to sovereignty. They're very reluctant to open the door or have the intrusion of the state coming onto our homeland and through granting, through regulation and oversight. So I'm just making this comment today to facilitate, if you want to facilitate this interagency cooperation and stuff. There are provisions in the state law that allow that to happen. There's even annual language that comes out for this state from government to government relationship. And so there's mechanisms, but it's a two-way street. And so we don't come to the attention of the legislature when they meet every 2 years for very many topics. So this was passed through, but in my opinion, the governor should use his executive authority and dial this thing out and not put the politicians in charge to create these bills. It's been by statute. And the gentleman to my right here has no choice but to follow that language, definition. And he probably should have not closed that door, but gave himself some flexibility and did it through his executive authority and not inviting the legislature. So that's what legislatures will do. They'll put stopgaps and everything to make it difficult to facilitate the interagency relationship.
And just for the record, that was George Henry, that was not Chad Roop making the comment. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, are we okay to take maybe a 10-15 minute break here and then we'll get started on my presentation?
Yeah,
Unless you want to talk any more, Adam, or?
Do you have anything else? Do you have anything else to add, Adam, or should we take? Is it time for a break? I don't see any hands up on Zoom.
Just a big thank you. Just a big thank you for everybody, right? We're gonna keep moving along. I just appreciate the candor. Gilbert and I are here, right? We're the messengers. We're trying to bridge gaps and build relationships or get folks chatting. And I think that the number one goal that we intended for both NTIA, the state, and the tribes was to get a dialogue moving about how to work together. And obviously, when you start to go down that path, you got to talk about the things that may have been road bumps in the past. So I appreciate everybody's just open candor and dialogue around this, and look forward to seeing how we can all work together to get this money out the door and start solving these problems. So we'll, I guess, 15 minutes? Is that what time is it?
Yeah, 15.
10:30?
Thank you again, everyone. Yeah, we can 10:30.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you again, everyone. Yes, just this last year. I'm not mine for my kids this summer, but I think it was yeah.
Thing is, COVID doesn't kill them. Somebody, you and I had about the same time. Probably the same also. Oh, my mother, 94 years old. 94. She got it. She came through her choice. My grandma got it. She's given almost 90. And look through there, I'm glad to see that it's pretty. I'm following you there. I figure I'm whatever immunity you get. Yeah. That's to be like the more frenetic the propaganda gets, the less you get. Propaganda load on this. I think the detox itself is $7 billion. Three of the are you so, you know, this is
Okay, everybody, we'll get started here in about another 3 or 4 minutes. All right, we're about 1 minute out. All right, good morning, everybody. Good, we'll get started here. Thanks for your continued attention. I'm Chad Roop. I'm with the state of Montana. I'm the Broadband Program Manager. The things I'm going to be talking about today, I know we've focused on NTIA and their funding source. And please understand that funding under the BEAD program is coming. But what I'm going to focus on today is the Connect Montana program. And that Connect Montana program is currently funded by the ARPA Act, Section 602 specifically, and potentially 604. I know that a lot of municipalities, localities, and I believe even tribal governments received 603 funding under Treasury, but we're getting ready to implement the funding that was provided to the state specifically for broadband under 602. That is how the Connect Montana program was established. It flowed through enabling state legislation, Senate Bill 297 and House Bill 632 under the ARPA Commission with the governor's office. The first thing that I'd like to point out is that regardless of the type or method or means of communication, unless we know who to talk to, communication is very difficult. And so what I'd ask is, even if you are not in any way, shape, or form planning to apply for state funding, we do have a state broadband office, and I would ask that you please provide us with your contact information for who that person is within the tribal government that is handling your broadband plans, because there are certain things we need to be coordinating, even if you're not applying for funding. And if we don't know who to contact, it makes it very difficult to have that coordination. So whether it's an email, a phone number, an address, please give us that contact information and talk with Misty here with the governor's office if you'd like. You feel free to reach out to myself or Isabel here in her office, but we would love to have your contact information because we really need to know who that person is. We have people who will be applying for funding, and they may be applying for funding in Indian country. And unless we know who to coordinate with, we may not have all the best information. And we really want to be able to have good collaboration and coordination, even if the tribe itself is not applying for NTI funding or they did. I don't know. Like I said earlier, I'm not good at reading minds. I don't know who applied for what. I know that there was a lot of money applied for nationally. I don't know who applied for what within the state of Montana for the NTIA funds specific to the tribal money. So it's very helpful if I have that information just from an awareness standpoint. Because again, I don't want to violate congressional intent of overbuilding somebody who's been approved or is soon to be approved when I have other applications sitting there that's going to potentially be serving the very same locations that you've already coordinated for application. I want to be respectful of the sovereignty of the tribes and your localities. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And unless I know who to contact, that's going to make it very difficult. So one other thing I'll mention is please put in comments to the NTIA. This is the time frame. Having been a Fed, I can say that it's very important that you get the information in now. It's very hard to change something after it's been cast, as what's already been mentioned before. So if you have a comment, please provide that. If you have a comment on the state programs, you know, you have different representatives or senators within the state government, and I'd ask that you please reach out to them in that aspect, because those are the types of things that are necessary to be able to move forward. And I'd also highly recommend not putting all your eggs in one basket. They mentioned 6 times oversubscription. That means that there's going to be a whole lot of sad faces across the United States on this money. It doesn't mean that you're barred from ever getting any money fix the issue. The issue still needs to be fixed. There's a lot more money coming, and there are methods to be able to change things to make this thing work. So if you have that desire, please reach out to your representative or state senator. Like I mentioned, we're funded with 602 funds from ARPA, and we're planning on implementing that here in the very near future. This is the main information page. The Connect Montana program is something that we've just stood up. It's a new office. This is a new program. We developed a website at connectmt.mt.gov. This is the face of that on the internet. So if you go to the website, that's how you interface with the website. You can sign up, you can provide public comment. I provide that at the front of this because I think it's important that you understand the means of doing this. While I have no issue in giving people my contact information, the issue that I do have is that if you're contacting me directly, what that does is it is kind of like what we faced earlier in this room. Some of the people hear some of the information, and a whole lot of people don't hear the information that needs to be conveyed. That's the reason this exists. It allows you to be able to convey that information so that we can reply in a public forum and allow there to be public engagement. So please respect that process. It's very important. We want to make sure that everybody has access to as much information as possible. The way we organize the website is you've got the information and who's on the commission for ARPA listed there. You have links to the enabling legislation, which is SB 297 and House Bill 632. But in addition to that, we organize this similar to what USDA had for Reconnect. I'm the guy that stood up and ran the Reconnect program under the previous administration, so I borrowed a lot of information on how to do that. So one of the things that we put on there was a place for information, a place for where people apply, where we announce awards, and then where there's the auditing and reporting piece of it on the back end. So under the information area is where we're going to have the broadband now. We've contracted with Lightbox, who is standing up that statewide broadband map for us right now. We're working through that. We plan to deploy that here in the near future. Once we get that up and running, after that is when we'll plan to open up that application window. But we don't want to do it before that because I think it's important for everybody to understand the baseline of information. While it's not in and of itself an authoritative source, it is a guidepost for us to say, okay, this is where we think we are. So when we receive applications, I know the providers will be looking at that map and saying, okay, this is where the state understands their service. It's either defined as frontier, unserved, or underserved. And that is defined by state statute. So those pieces of information will be on that statewide broadband map. There'll be more maps, and like I said, that first map is going to be our starting point, and it's going to be updated on a periodic basis. It's not a one-time static map that gets done. It will be an interactive map, and so it'll allow for anyone to go on there and take a look at their residents and say, how does the state see this location that I'm in right now? Is it defined by them as one of those four, 3 or 4 items? We'll also have forms and guides under the information tab. For instance, our application guide. We're getting ready to go online and provide that. We're finalizing some of the last procedures and rules we want to do, but once we do that, then that application guide will be on there to help walk through those types of things. We'll have webinars on there, such as the one that we're doing today that we're recording. We plan to provide the PowerPoints and the recording onto that website. We're an office of 3 people right now, so we will do our best on getting that done in a timely fashion to where everyone will have access to this information. So that website is something that I hope everyone uses and follows for updates. That's where we'll announce awards. That's where you'll see the shape files for the maps on who got awarded what locations. That's also where you'll have the opportunity to see where people have challenged and people have applied. So those are some of the baseline opportunities that you'll see off that website. Yeah, you bet. The agenda, we're going to follow this up probably 30 times by now. I know that most folks probably have not read Senate Bill 297. And so I want to give you a brief outline of some of the things that have gone on so far within enabling legislation and what's been approved by the commission so far for implementing this program. There's a little bit of a delay here, so. First of all, I'm going to talk about eligible providers. This was discussed earlier today. Under Senate Bill 297, this is the way the statute reads. It talks about who's authorized to do business within the state for these funds, or who's authorized to receive these funds. And first of all, you have to be authorized to do business within the state. What I'd ask is that your entity be registered with the Secretary of State here in Montana. That's very important. You also have to demonstrate that you have the technical, financial, and managerial capacity to deliver broadband service to retail customers within the state. So you have to be able to show that you have someone that can handle, for instance, when you have something break down, can they fix the issue? Do you have the managerial capacity? Do you have folks that are experienced in running the business of operating a broadband service? Do you have the financial capacity to be able to sustain that service? When you receive funds, these funds are intended to provide for you to provide that service for a minimum of 5 years. And the way we'll implement this, we talk a lot about oversight, and I heard a little bit of that discussion earlier. This is a reimbursement process. So when you build it, then you seek reimbursement on a periodic basis as you build it. This isn't just the state government writing you a great big check when we decide to do an award and we walk away from it. There is oversight to this. There is a requirement to ensure that you're doing what you're required to do. And so those are some of the things that are in the statute, and that's the reasons behind some of those meanings. You have to be a non-government entity who's demonstrated experience in providing broadband service for residential and businesses in the state. That's the way the statute reads. So again, if you're applying for the state funding that's coming through a federal source, I would ask for you to please participate with a provider to allow you to have that opportunity if you seek these funds. This commitment that we have requires 20% match. That's less than the 25% match with NTIA. One of the key things in this enabling information or enabling statute is that that match can be derived from federal funds that are specifically designated for broadband deployment. That's an important piece for you guys to understand. If it's specifically designated for broadband deployment, it is eligible for a match. If it's not, then you cannot use that towards that match. It has to be something that is truly, to use a term that my old boss used to use, skin in the game. You have to show a willingness to participate and show a commitment to it, and that's part of the reasons for that. If you already have funding that's providing 100% of the build out, this is intended for infrastructure build out. We're not going to put state money in, and we can't put state money into something that's already been committed to be built because, again, congressional intent, do not overbuild. And when we have multiple sources funding the same infrastructure to overbuild an area, it's just not going to be able to happen. Anything I say today, realize state statute is governing. So if I say something that is misquoted or misinterpreted, please refer back to the state statute because that is the guiding statute. That's what I have to follow. That's what we all have to follow moving forward. And I'll do my best to abide by that, and I have folks that help me do that. So please understand that. I think it's important to understand different terms. There's a lot of things that have come forward in state legislation and frankly in federal legislation over the last year. There's a lot of issue with what the FCC has defined as service, what NTIA and congressional legislation has defined as service, and what state statute has defined in service. Under Senate Bill 297, the way we are defining these is specifically rolled out in state legislation. For instance, unserved is defined as anything less than 2510, not 25.3. So a little bit of difference there. Underserved is specifically defined as anything less than 120 that doesn't have low latency as well. So latency is defined here, and we'll get to that here in a second, but also underserved is something that is a new definition that's come into being here in the last couple of years. Frontier area. Frontier area is a relatively new term, although we've been very familiar with it for those that have lived in these areas. The FCC has a way to define frontier, and I took when I lack definition, I usually try to default back to what FCC is using as a definition if I can, because they are the source of information for a lot of these from a technical standpoint. So when we talk about frontier, I'm using it as anything less than 4.1 delivery. So if you have old copper wiring that is your only way of getting service, that location is considered unserved because it can't even get you the basic requirements that was defined well over 10 years ago by the FCC for even standard service. So it's pretty clear that's, to me, would be a frontier area. But when I look at an area, I look at a project area that you define by a shapefile, not by a predefined boundary or line in the sand, so to speak, of what is where. The person who is, or the entity that is applying for funding is defining their own project area. The map will show locations. You can draw that map for a proposed application, however you choose to define that. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to block out people who need service from getting service by some predetermined boundary, such as a census block, by the FCC's definition that we all know has faulty information in it. And why is the state doing its own map? The state is doing its own map because we don't have a good, strong federal map currently. And even when we do, the state has a need to be able to test the validity of that federal map. And we have to have the ability to provide our comments back on a federal map of what we consider there to be served and unserved and underserved locations in frontier areas versus what the FCC or any other federal entity is telling us. So it's important for us to have that independent capacity to be able to have our own determination of what that looks like. So those are two of the reasons why we're doing a map. So you see a project area, it's something that you define by a shapefile. A shapefile is basically you drawing on the map where you want your application to fund, or for us to fund an application, where you're going to build out new service to an area. I think it's also important to understand that we have different ways that we can deliver the funding. This round of funding that we're planning to do is going to be a statewide open application. You come to us and tell us where, as an applicant, you're trying to gain service. That's where we're going to first focus our effort, because we don't want to overlook places that are unserved or underserved that are eligible for funding by putting a predetermined area up and shutting out other areas that have need for service. Again, realize the mapping system that we're currently relying on from the federal government isn't the best. So it's probably not in our best interest to predefine locations that lack service when you all know better than we do currently who has service and who doesn't. And so that's the reason why we'll have a guiding map. You tell us where you want to provide service, and we'll take that into consideration and put it through our process. However, we do have the capacity to define areas should we choose to do so. We do have that capacity within state legislation. So that is a possibility to do as we move forward. And please understand that the state statute does allow for any request to be canceled or any proposal to be rejected in whole or in part if it's in what the commission and the governor deems are in the best interest of the state. That's within the statute. So that's just important to recognize. This funding is intended for broadband deployment, whereas NTIA had adoption and a lot of those other things that are also eligible for funding. This funding is there to build things. So we're looking to put towers up, fiber in the ground, you know, those types of things to deploy sites that get people connected within the state. That's what we're trying to do. And that includes middle mile, that includes last mile, that includes all the things that you need to be able to get somebody service to a location. That also includes all the potential costs moving forward, including in that project area. For instance, engineering costs, legal fees, permitting, things of that nature that are directly associated with providing service to an area. What does it not cover? It doesn't cover operating costs. So if you have overhead that's directly assigned to building out infrastructure, that's okay. But it's not throwing in everything in the kitchen sink into an application and funding the operating expenses on a sustained basis to build this out. That is not what this funding is intended for. There are other sources of funds to be able to help with that if that's what your desire is to do. Low latency. This is something that is defined by the FCC, and that's something that I think is important to understand. When I told you guys about my folks, you know, they're advertised as 25.3 and they're getting 0.8. You couldn't do anything. Obviously, the latency was horrible. And so that's the reason why we're doing this. When you look at what is 120 with the capacity to build out to 100 symmetrical mean, it means that you can do a bunch of things simultaneously, such as your kids are at home during homework. Your spouse has a telehealth appointment. She can be on her computer, he can be on his computer, interfacing with the doctor at the same time that you're attending this Zoom meeting. That's the type of low latency that we're talking about. The FCC has this definition. We try, again, when we lack definition within the state and there's not any other guidance associated with it, I try and fall back on what the FCC's technical definition is, because it's the best I can do for now. And like I said, this is not intended to fund operating expenses on a sustained basis. So when you apply for funding, if you plan to do so, please keep that in mind. When you do apply for funding, it's going to be an online application. So I ask that you work with somebody who has that capacity. It will be under the connectmt.mt.gov. When we open up the application window under the Apply tab is where you'll find that opportunity, and you can walk through the process there. We will have an application guide. We will have the contact information for if you're having trouble, you can call in. And even if the person that you immediately talk to can't answer the information, it flows through our office and we work our best to get you an answer as soon as we can. I have received some requests for information already. I don't currently have an answer yet for that. I'm working to get an answer as quickly as possible. So even if you don't get an answer right away, I will do my best to get you as timely an answer as soon as I can to allow you to continue to move through that application window. I don't want to necessarily read these slides to you, but I just think it's important that you understand some of these things. One of the important pieces of this is we want to ensure that when you submit your application, a professionally licensed engineer with the state of Montana that's registered with the state as an engineer has stamped your application, because we have to ensure that what is promised to be delivered is technically feasible. When an engineer stamps on a document and says that it's feasible, that tells us that somebody who is in the business of doing this says, yes, this will work. We also have engineers who we're contracting with to review that from a technical standpoint and other aspects. But when we have somebody that puts their professional engineer stamp on it, we know that somebody has looked at it and said, yep, this is going to work. So that we have good money going to good projects, and it doesn't turn into something that fails to deliver what has been required by the federal government for service on the other end. While this allows for middle mile, there is a focus as well on last mile. And so even if it has middle mile in it, we ask that you ensure that it shows how it enables connections for retail customers in the last mile. So we allow both middle mile and last mile or a combination thereof. But when you submit it, make sure that if you're doing a middle mile project, it shows the capacity and the agreements to help deliver last mile connectivity, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect Montanans. We're not trying to connect people who live in Oregon or Washington or North Dakota or South Dakota. We're not looking for long haul applications only. We want to make sure we've got capacity to deliver retail broadband for Montanans. We also want to understand what are all the costs that are associated with putting together the proposed project and the time frame for delivery, because all of these projects have a time constraint on them for us to both obligate and expend the funds by the sheer fact that these are federally sourced. Every federal funding mechanism has certain time constraints, and this one does as well. So it's important for us to understand that you're going to be able to build this project within that time frame. We do recognize the current supply chain situation and the workforce situation. We plan to discuss those constraints, and we will take that into account as well. We'll do our best to work with folks within what the federal government requires of us, and we will have our own discussions with the federal government where we see appropriate for necessary extensions if that's what's needed to be able to deliver on these services. But we recognize the current situation as it is, and we'll do our best to work with folks to accommodate that within the requirements that the federal government has and state law allows. One thing that's important to take into account, not everybody thinks about this up front, and it often causes issues later on, is the government authorizations and permits. This is an issue for a lot of different aspects in environmental law. We're required to follow environmental law with this funding. So please provide a preliminary list of any permits that you are applying for, have applied for, been approved for. Don't forget the environmental piece. It's important to take that into account. Whether it's rights of ways or easements or things of that nature, because it impacts cost, it impacts routes, it impacts the total cost of the project. We don't have extra money in this program. If you have a cost overrun, that is a liability of the applicant and awardee, not of the state government. The risk lies with the applicant, not with the state government. So as you put in these project costs, please take into account the current situation that we're in with inflation and things of that nature. Plan for contingencies in your project, because we don't have a 10% cost overrun provision like you see in some federal programs. That's not where the state is with its funding. So we plan to deploy as much of this funding as we can, and cost overruns are not included. So I'd ask that you please consider that as you move forward. When we do publish the application, which we're required to do, we are also required to redact any trade secret or confidential information that the applicant says is a trade secret or confidential. We are very much required to do that. If and when you decide to apply, please ensure that you give us that information. There is a section in the online application for you to be able to designate that information. There's narrative areas that is very clearly listed in the online application to make sure that we understand that. I very much am sensitive to that, and we want to ensure that we're doing the right things. But we are required to do those. We're required to post that application for the world to see in certain aspects. And what that means is shapefile goes up saying you intend to apply for a certain area, and here's the general information on this project. That's what we need to know. That's what the public needs to know. Because if you're a carrier and you're going into an area that is potentially already served, it allows for an applicant to challenge that application. And an applicant cannot challenge your application unless they know the locations you're planning to serve and the basic information about the project. And that's what that's intended to be able to do. This is state statute. So once we receive a submission, we have to make that publicly available on an electronic file. That will be available on the Connect Montana website. Once that application is up, we'll open up a challenge window, which we're required to do again by state statute. So the application window will be a 60-day application window. The challenge period will be a 30-day challenge period. And once we receive those challenges, we have a very strict timeline imposed by state statute to respond to a challenge. So what we have to take a look at is, what is the application? What is the location that is being challenged? Why is it being challenged? And then be able to respond in a timely fashion to the challenger and the applicant. In that proposal under the challenge, you have to show what locations you're talking about challenging and why. And is there what is the reason behind it? Part of that is discussion of, is there other federal money that's already approved to serve that location? Or do you already serve that location or locations with service as defined by state statute above 120 with low latency? I should say at or above 120 with low latency currently. We are required as a department to conduct our own independent review of a challenge and an application. So we will do that. We're working through some of these processes on implementation. Those are not yet for public comment or public review, but understand that we're working through some of these issues and we'll have those hopefully decided before we open up the application window. So we plan to work through all of these things as much as we can and try and alleviate as much angst and concern as providers or applicants may have prior to that window opening. We can't award any allocation to a broadband provider if it violates any of the state statute that is implemented. That's just, that I know it seems like a no-brainer, but that's specifically written in state statute. So it's why it's important, if you do plan to apply for funding, please read that statute through and through, read the online application through and through, and be familiar with the website. Once we receive an application and we receive a challenge, and for instance, if that challenge is successful, then what we are allowed to do by law is for the applicant who may have a very good project, but part of that project overlaid and it was successfully challenged. We don't want to refuse service to somebody who had an otherwise good application with a lot of unserved or underserved locations in the overall project area. So we'll carve that out and allow the applicant to revise their application if they choose to do so. It still meets the technical, financial, and managerial capacity to deliver on a sustained basis broadband service to those locations. So we'll allow people to do that for a period of time, and then we'll move forward with the eligibility review and things of that nature. One thing that's important to note is that we have to create procedures for penalties associated with anybody who fails to comply with provisions. That includes both, that is very important for once an award is made, because if you promise to deliver on a service and you fail to deliver on that promise in accordance with the agreement, we have to have penalties associated with it, required by statute. One thing that we determined early, or I should say late last year, was the scoring chart. The state statute requires us to put priority on certain aspects of applications that the state legislature considered important. That's what this scoring chart did. It was approved by the commission shortly before Christmas of this last year. And so that's what this is there for. This chart is available under the information tab on our website. So you don't have to write it all down here because I know it's too much information. Obviously, matching funds is important. And so that's item one. There's 120 points possible in the scoring chart. Please understand, the scoring chart is the scoring chart. Eligible applications will be scored, and that's what it is. And then that will be what is taken into account in the review process. So again, we're defining some of the procedures currently, and so I'm not going to go into public comment on what those do, but understand this is the scoring chart. This is what we have determined as a commission to say, based off state legislation, this is where the priorities, and we're defining points associated with those priorities for these different aspects. So we talk about matching funds, we talk about service to locations, we talk about the proposed speed to deliver to those locations. One of the things that's important to note is I know that $275 million seems like a lot of money, but anybody that's been in the business and sees the state of Montana understands that's not going to cure all the ills and get everybody fiber to the premises. So it's very important that we try to leverage as much existing infrastructure as we can. So we try to incentivize people to leverage existing infrastructure to be able to ensure that these once-in-a-lifetime opportunity dollars are delivered appropriately, and we are not overbuilding. So we're trying to encourage people to work together to allow service into those unserved areas, to get out to these areas that have the greatest need. And unless we are using all the existing infrastructure that we have at hand, we're going to limit our dollars even further if we're having to put fiber on top of fiber. The entire intent of this is also for enabling economic development. You know, you guys heard me during the introduction talking about leveraging the capacity for our kids and our grandkids to have opportunities where we grew up. That's tracked in the mechanism of looking at the number of jobs that are created. If you can create jobs in those communities, what a wonderful thing to do. You're enabling people to live and enjoy where they work instead of having to move to work in some place because that's where they had to go to provide that economic opportunity for their families. So that's the reason that's there. It's a very important priority, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Also, equity and affordability are accounted for in the scoring chart. I know that it's very important under the NTIA program and some of the information we've seen out of federal sources, and we're required to do some of this under future funding under NTIA. So this is there. This has been approved by the commission, and it's just a way for us to be able to track some of these important equity and affordability standpoints to make sure that when people are delivering that service, that people can actually use that service, regardless of their economic status. This is our estimated timeline. Please understand that, again, this is estimated. I'm doing my best, and our office is doing our best to deliver this as quickly as we can with proper due diligence that goes into it. So this timeline slipped a little bit from what I initially put forward to the commission, but I'm doing my best to make sure that we keep on track as much as we can. So with that, I will open it up for questions and comments, and I'll answer what I can today, and if I can't, we'll take note of it, and I'll do what I can to get you an appropriate answer in the right time frame. Sorry, who is first? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you had experience in your own family where connectivity was 28. I would assume that the system was not designed to be at that level. So obviously there are some fairly substantial flaws in the implementation side. In talking to people with various parts of Montana, that doesn't appear to be an isolated instance. So part of the challenge that I think for the state is how do you overcome those kinds of implementation problems that seem to have failed in the past? One of the things that you talked about is the importance of the site map that's going to be generated by a third party. What I didn't hear you say was that it's going to be any sort of review process by the professionals that are working with the tribes. They have a challenge of appeal process. You know, this gentleman to my right talked about being in an environment where there's a substantial amount of checkerboard. You know, if you look at a firm putting that together, they've got to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to do it right. And a lot of time checkerboard type detail just doesn't seem to quite make the man. Is there going to be an appeal process?
So you're asking about the appeal process, and then, when you talk about the appeal process, are you talking about the proposed delivery, or are you talking about once an award has been made and auditing the implementation?
How do you know that the method is everything just be right?
That's very much a valid concern, and one of the things that I know is that when people provide their information as providers, what's been allowed to happen in the past with the FCC is that, you know, what is your area, and serve one location within an area. That's where you can limit to specific locations. The map is there as a guidepost. There are opportunities to provide updated information, and so yes, there will be a process for people to interact with it. The methodology is White Box's methodology, and these information is provided by providers to White Box. Does have the capacity for people to provide information that is different from what the provider allows. Again, it's a baseline, but when people submit an application, it's our job to review that against what is currently being shown on the map and what is reality. And so we will have a process to look at something and determine whether or not what has been reported is what is accurate. And I understand what your question leads to, but part of that is understanding within our internal processes, and realize this is a new program that we're implementing. So we have to have the right people doing the right things in our location. One of them is our engineer, who's supposed to look at the technical aspects of what is currently reflected on the ground and proposed on the ground. Those are important pieces of that review process. The other part that's important is going out and looking at it and saying, what do we have? What is currently out there and what is proposed? Believe me, I'm fully aware, sometimes what is reported is different than reality on the ground, and it's our job to be able to differentiate that. I don't have a firm answer for you on what that process looks like in writing today, but believe me, there is a process for us to review that during the review of an application comes to us. And part of that opportunity is for challenges as well.
You mentioned that the payment process is on a reimbursement basis. So I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. Along with the reimbursement process, you indicated that if there was any budget overages, it was not the state's responsibility. So let me make sure that I understand when you give you this scenario. In the highest inflation rate this country's seen in what, 30 years? And as you acknowledge the supply chain problems and workforce problems and escalating costs of labor, that if by chance somebody misses the mark and submits an after the fact reimbursement request, the state's going to come off the knees, stop the project entirely, and not let it be finished.
What you have to find is a resource for delivering on those funds. These grants are required to have a match. You've got to put in your matching fund prior to our funding getting delivered. And so, yes, you need to have in reserve funding that you believe is the right estimate for that delivery. If you run into a situation where you have a cost overrun and you haven't allocated for that, the state's required to show sustainability to a project. If you have a cost overrun and you can't complete the project, that is not a sustainable project. So we're limited by sustainability if you are showing financial capacity to deliver. understand the situation. That's why you have to have proper planning up front, and that's sufficient reserve to be able to handle that. I hope I'm not sure for the difference in that household.
I'm not sure you understand how match works. You have to submit your budget up front that shows the match. And that should be already built into. And if prices go up, and you ask for a reimbursement, there's not going to be any match available.
Sir, believe me, I've ran federal programs, I've ran federal agencies, I understand the reimbursement process, I get it, and that's why I say you have to plan appropriately. That's the best answer I can give you currently. There are other sources of funding associated with delivering on infrastructure, not necessarily just our program. So there are ways to get funding through other conventional means, other than just the federal grant or the cost overrun, if that's what's necessary. I know it's not the answer you want to hear, but that's the reality of it.
You're telling me you have to go find another funding source, but since there is contingency, just in case the other one can fund that project that way?
I'm sorry, I disagree, and I think we just have to agree with that. So I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
What's an allowable contingency income?
Historically, in normal times, what we plan for is 10% contingency. However, recognizing the unique times that we're in, I think we're going to take quite a bit of flexibility in what we consider contingency, understanding that there is a concern for cost overruns. We just have to show some relevance to what the current situation is. Sure.
So what I've gathered from what I've heard you say is you guys are still in the development process for the maps that you're creating, and you want it to be a living, breathing kind of ongoing resource. Would you be willing to accept feature requests, which might promote transparency and other things? Would you be willing to accept or entertain feature requests? Things that, people might think would help you guys to achieve the, best middle ground between various parties.
We'll take any public comments you wish to provide. If you want to, put it through our system, we're more happy to take it to account and appreciate it.
What requirement does the state have for applications that are submitted that are on tribal land in Montana?
First of all, I think it's important that when we go through the process, that there be an awareness of what is being applied for. So we have to post that up on the website. In our due diligence of the review process, I think it's good practice for us to reach out to discuss that with, or to look at it based off the proposed location. If someone's building something on a reservation, then there are permits that are required. Therefore, it does require some sort of consultation with the tribal government in the permitting process. That's just the reality. So there has to be an awareness, there has to be consultation that is on, and part of that responsibility is on the letter, and it's our due diligence to review an application that comes in with the proposed service on a reservation. So.
I think it's always wise for a provider to consult with the tribal government, but each reservation is different when it comes to whether there are tribal approvals required. And for instance, on the Flathead, there's an awful lot of private land, there's state rights of way, and the tribe does not have any direct jurisdiction over approvals for those rights of way. It's only when you are using across tribal lands or on tribal road that tribal or explicit tribal approval is required.
Yes, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I agree. it's something I've dealt with in other states as well, so yes. Any other questions? Okay, if you have any questions? Okay. Todd, I believe you're unmuted if you'd like to ask a question. Todd Hanson.
Thank you, Chad. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
So I'm with Norseman Consulting Group out of Havern, and working with our clients who are submitting applications and proposals under this project. We've run into this question with respect to matching funds, so I just wanted to present it to you. So if the envisioned project for which the broadband funding support is being sought is part of an existing deployment strategy, can the existing financial investment made by the applicant qualify as meeting some or all of the 20% matching requirement?
That's a great question, and I appreciate it. And I don't have an answer for you today. I'm working on gathering an answer for you. I want to make sure that it's, one, legally allowed, and two, it's something that the Commission believes is appropriate. So those are two things that I'm working on, getting an answer. And so please give me the time to be able to respond to that. But yes, your question is noted, and I appreciate the question. It's a very valid question, a key concern, and I want to make sure that we're giving you the legally correct answer because, again, we're required by environment to required to follow all federal environmental laws. And so we want to make sure that, you know, that we've got the appropriate standing to deliver an answer for you.
Thank you, Chad.
Sure, you bet.
The current Connect Montana program was funded totally by the ARRA, I believe, and now we have the infrastructure bill that was passed. Just conservatively, that's probably going to double the amount of money that your program will have available, and possibly more. Any idea when that will be decided?
Thanks for the question. I think that's another good question. First of all, we're really focused on trying to get this initial bucket of money out and realizing that there's more money coming and there's timelines that NTIA has for us to deliver a plan, and that plan includes implementation of those funds. There are certain statutes within the BEAD program that we're required to follow. There are also rules that they're going to have to implement based off folks who just got appointed into leading the organization. So once those decisions are made, that's when we can really have a better estimate of the timeline. But understanding that there's going to be probably going to have to be some things that change within our state statute to be able to deliver on those programs that they have at the federal level. So I would estimate that it would obviously be after next legislative session that would be able to implement on the BEAD program. That's strictly my forecasting. So that's kind of where I see that. But most likely next calendar year is when I would see us implementing this, the BEAD program, along with the other NTIA programs. But the state does plan to move forward on applying to deliver on this one. Yes, right. Interesting.
You got February 7th as your window to conference in the middle of the state. With all that we talked about here in London, you guys still in the air from this time, you think that date is directly with the properly with
The question is, will the February 7th date slip or likely to slip? I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't. I'm trying to ensure that we've got as much due diligence happening as quickly as possible. In fact, once every year this afternoon, we have a working group, and there's no other commission meeting later on this month to help finalize some of these procedures that we're working on. So assuming that we get a proper decision made by the appropriate sources, then we'll be able to open it up by that time frame. It also assumes the broadband app gets delivered prior to opening the site. So working diligently to get that done, do the best I can. So that's the best I can tell you. So, but the nice thing is and I'll say this coming from the outside in, it's nice not having a bunch of things that we've got to fix right out of the gate and all the procedures that we've got to fix for the immediate implementation. So it's nice not having if we have a team who's staying up with an office already done, there are good things to that. There's also a lot of things that we repeat are going to in a short period of time. So we've got a small group of people who are looking at how to do it on time. Any other questions? Okay, I don't believe I see any hands up. So with that, Misty, would you like to help us conclude the meeting? I'd just like to say thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the questions. Even if you didn't get the answer you liked or didn't feel it was appropriate, please comment, if you would, on our Connect Montana website. And we'll take all of those public comments into consideration. So thank you.
Okay, so we will have lunch being served pretty quick here. 12:45 or 11? 11:45. Okay, no worries, no worries. So 11:45 in the next room over. Perfect. Great, great. And then I would encourage those of you who are interested to please stick around. At 1, we'll come back here, and our Director of Housing for the state of Montana has a brief presentation on collaboration between state and tribes on housing. And it would be really great if you could take that information back when you head back. And I also wanted to point out that the slide presentations today will be sent out within the next couple of days. We'll do our best, but everyone will get a copy of the slide deck today. So with that, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to those who attended online. I'm so glad that we offered that as an option. I feel like today was really, really fruitful. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to me or Chad or Gilbert, and we'll be happy to take those and keep the communication lines open. So thanks for coming.